There's concern from the West over Russia's decision to suspend the UN-brokered deal to allow safe passage for ships carrying Ukrainian grain.
The number of victims crushed to death at a Halloween party in South Korea stands at over 150, with scores more injured in the tragedy.
Ukraine says it's shot down some 300 so-called suicide drones as Russia suspends the UN grain export deal, threatening global food prices.
Brazilians head to the polls to vote in what's being seen as the most divisive election in Brazil's history. Global hunger could increase because of Russia's suspension of a UN-brokered deal to allow safe passage for ships carrying Ukrainian grain, according to US President Joe Biden. Russia will officially notify the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres of the move, but it was announced first in a tweet by Moscow's first deputy permanent representative of Russia to the UN. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky calls the move predictable. Russia began deliberately aggravating the food crisis back in September, when it blocked the movement of ships with our food. This is an absolutely transparent intention of Russia to return the threat of large-scale famine to Africa and Asia. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, calls on Russia to reverse its decision. The US President says Moscow's action is scandalous.
It's just purely outrageous. It's going to increase starvation. There's no reason for them to do that. The UN negotiated that deal, and that should be the end of it.
So far, the grain initiative has allowed more than 9 million tons of grain in 397 ships to safely leave Ukrainian ports since it was signed in July, bringing down global food prices. The deal was supposed to be renewed in late November.
Tributes are piling up at the scene of a Halloween party in the South Korean capital, where over 150 people died and scores more were injured on Saturday. Most of the victims were in their teens or 20s. More than 20 foreign nationals died in the accident, including victims from China, Russia, Iran and Norway. Tens of thousands are believed to have gathered in Seoul's Itaewon district for the event. The victims were trapped and crushed when the crowd surged into a narrow alleyway. The city's mayor, Oh Se-hoon, cut short his trip to Europe over the tragedy. Visiting the scene, he said he was praying for the souls of the deceased and the recovery of the injured. He vowed that he would do everything in his power in dealing with the aftermath and helping victims and their families cope with the tragedy, including funeral arrangements. My friend said to me, "There's something terrible going on outside." I asked why, and he told me that someone had died. I said, "What do you mean?" I went outside to look, and people were carrying out CPR.
Like, I have been many Halloween in Korea, even though always crowded, but nothing like this ever happened before. So I'm very like, it got me like very surprised, like very sad this happened. This is something like we never forget.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol declared a national mourning period on Sunday and ordered flags at government buildings and public offices to fly at half-mast.
While fuel shortages persist in France, the Netherlands may be facing a crisis of its own. Brussels warns fears of a diesel shortage are growing. Most of the bloc's supply is made from soon-to-be-banned imports of Russian oil. However, this energy provider maintains the situation is not so bad on Dutch soil. He says certainly not in the Netherlands. We have a more favourable position in the Netherlands. We produce about 3 to 4 times more than we consume. It is true that the situation throughout Europe is somewhat worrying. We see that the stocks are very low. We also expect less diesel to be imported, which will lead to more shortages. Energy giant BP boasts one of Europe's largest refineries in Rotterdam. While small independent gas stations say they might run dry due to declining Russian supply, the CEO of BP's Dutch branch says the company was well prepared. She says previously about a third of crude oil we use here came from Russia. When asked by a reporter when did you stop using that, she said we stopped that immediately at the end of February, when the terrible situation in Ukraine arose. However, as Western sanctions on Russia aimed at crippling Putin's war chest continue, oil companies around the world are now scouring the market for alternatives to Russian oil and diesel.
The war in Ukraine has seen Russia launch more than 8,000 airstrikes, President Volodymyr Zelensky claims. The weapon feared most by Kyiv is the Iranian suicide drone. Ukraine claims to have shot down some 300. During the week, from Saturday to Saturday, there have been more than 40 Iranian attack drones, a significant number of Russian missiles, 6 attacking helicopters of the occupiers, and several of their planes were shot down, Zelensky says. Such a result means hundreds of Ukrainian lives have been saved. This as Russia says it's immediately suspending its role in the UN-brokered grain deal that has seen more than 9 million tonnes exported from Ukraine during the war to bring down global food prices. Its defence ministry cites a drone attack on Russian Black Sea fleet ships. Ukraine denies it, saying Moscow mishandled its own weapons. The UN has been in touch over Russia's announced suspension as Zelensky warns the move returns the threat of a large-scale famine in Africa and Asia. On the front line, Kyiv's forces have made more grounds in the south as Russia keeps up its shelling and missile attacks in the country's east. Russian shelling has also hit an industrial building in the Zaporizhia region. Around a quarter of the area, including its capital, remains under Ukrainian control. But residents here are on high alert over fears of a nuclear explosion. Many are still trying to leave.
Brazilians head to the polls to vote in the presidential runoff between incumbent Jair Bolsonaro and challenger Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. It's being seen as the most divisive election in Brazil's history against a backdrop of concerns of political violence, corruption, rising poverty and the fate of the Amazon rainforest, amongst several other issues. The far-right incumbent and the leftist challenger are close after neither gaining 50% in the first runoff. However, Lula slightly leads in opinion polls with 53% of support as he seeks to return to the job he held from 2003 to 2010. During the 77-year-old's last rally on Saturday, he told supporters he's confident of victory and promises to return the country to normalcy. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro is not far behind Lula in the opinion polls with 48% of support. The 67-year-old told his supporters on Friday that he would respect the election result if he loses, saying whoever gets the most votes wins. That's democracy, something he previously said he wouldn't do.
Lebanon's outgoing President Michel Aoun vacated the palace of Babda on Sunday, leaving a void at the top of the failing country. The 89-year-old Christian presided over the state's financial meltdown and the deadly Beirut port explosion that killed over 200 people in 2020. Leaving office with no one in line to replace him also leaves Lebanon facing a constitutional crisis. But despite the troubled legacy, thousands of supporters turned out to wave him off after hearing him acknowledge the struggle ahead.
تركت وراي وضع بده نضال.
The situation requires a huge effort. You know how much Lebanon and you yourselves have lost. Without this effort, we can't put an end to our suffering. We can't salvage Lebanon out of this deep pit. The results of elections in Slovakia are due to be announced on Sunday. Voting started at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning and went on until 8 p.m. People are electing mayors, local and regional councillors, as well as regional governors. Official figures list more than 4.4 million eligible voters, with polling stations in almost 3,000 places. Scores of people are reported to have been killed and injured after a cable bridge collapsed into a river in western India. It happened in the state of Gujarat on Sunday evening, according to Indian media sources. The report said hundreds of people plunged into the Machu River when the bridge fell. The structure had only just been reopened after renovations, according to officials.